At an opulent rehearsal dinner in Charleston, a quiet black waiter named Marcus Hall serves champagne with steady hands, ignored by the glittering crowd. The air in the grand ballroom of the Magnolia Grove estate was thick with the scent of lilies and old money. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto guests dressed in silks and tailored suits, their laughter echoing off the high, frescoed ceilings. Marcus moved through the celebration with an economy of motion that made him almost invisible, a shadow in a crisp black uniform. His hands were steady, his posture perfect, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professional neutrality. He refilled a flute here, cleared a small plate there, his presence a silent testament to seamless service. He was a ghost at the feast, and that was precisely how they saw him. The moment of injustice came without warning, a sharp, ugly crack in the polished veneer of the evening. The bride, Haley Monroe, a vision in a white couture dress, turned abruptly, her arm catching a tray Marcus was holding. A few drops of golden champagne arced through the air, landing near the hem of her expensive gown. Gasps rippled through the nearby cluster of guests. Haley's smile, which had been bright and brittle all evening, vanished. She looked down at the tiny, glistening spots on the floor, then up at Marcus. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were filled with a cold, dismissive fury. "Go clean something," she sneered, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Her lips curled into a cruel smile. "You're not part of the picture." A wave of uncomfortable laughter followed, the sound of people eager to please the woman at the center of their universe. The guests, her loyal court, joined in, their amusement a weapon aimed at the man in the black uniform. What no one knew, what no one could possibly imagine, was the secret power Marcus held. He wasn't a waiter, not really. He was Marcus Hall, the millionaire CEO of Hall Dynamics, a man whose name was whispered with a mix of awe and fear in boardrooms across the country. He owned this very venue, this grand estate, this stage for their opulent display. And more than that, a secret buried so deep it had almost been forgotten. He was the groom's estranged older brother. The man standing frozen beside the bride, his face pale and his smile faltering, was his blood. Before the night was over, every guest who laughed would stand silent. Every smirk would be wiped away by the cold, hard slap of the truth. Before the sun rose on the wedding day that would never happen, the bride's laughter would die in her throat, a choked, pathetic sound that would echo in the ruins of her carefully constructed world. This wasn't just a rehearsal dinner, it was a reckoning, and it had just begun. Before we find out what happens next, tell us, have you ever seen arrogance backfire this hard? Let us know in the comments and hit that like button if you're already hooked. The grand ballroom of the Magnolia Grove estate was a symphony of extravagance, a place designed to make people feel small and fortunate at the same time. Golden light from a dozen chandeliers washed over tables draped in heavy white linen, each adorned with towering floral arrangements of hydrangeas and roses. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a gentle, elegant current beneath the hum of conversation and the clinking of crystal glasses. Guests in their finest attire drifted from one conversation to another, their faces alight with the practiced ease of the wealthy. They spoke of summer homes in the Hamptons, of recent trips to Europe, of stock portfolios and political connections. They were a tribe, bound together by shared privilege, and tonight they had gathered to celebrate the union of two of their own, Ethan Monroe and Haley Preston. Marcus Hall moved through this world like a phantom. Dressed in the simple, functional black uniform of the catering staff, he was part of the machinery that made such an evening possible, yet entirely separate from it. He carried his tray with a practiced grace, his movements precise and economical. He refilled a champagne flute for a man boasting about a recent yacht purchase, his expression unreadable. He offered hors d'oeuvres to a group of women dissecting the flaws of a mutual acquaintance, his presence barely registered. He was scenery, a functional object, a pair of hands. To them, he had no past, no future, no identity beyond his role. This invisibility was a cloak, and tonight he wore it willingly. He watched the room not as a server, but as a strategist, gathering information, observing the players on the board. He saw the groom, his brother Ethan, looking handsome but strained in his custom tuxedo. He saw the bride, Haley, holding court like a queen, her laughter a little too loud, her smile a little too sharp. The incident, when it happened, was small, almost insignificant, a careless flick of a wrist. Haley, animated in her storytelling to her bridesmaids, gestured widely. Her hand bumped the edge of Marcus's silver tray as he passed. The champagne flutes on it rattled, and a few golden drops sloshed over the rim of one, spattering the polished marble floor a few inches from the hem of her pristine white dress. A collective gasp went through her circle of friends. It was the kind of minor mishap that would normally be met with a polite reassurance, a wave of the hand. But not from Haley. Her head whipped around, her eyes locking onto Marcus. The warmth in her face evaporated, replaced by a chilling disdain. All the evening's practiced charm fell away, revealing something ugly beneath. She looked from the tiny spill on the floor back to his face, and her voice, sharp and cold as ice, cut through the soft music. "Can't you do anything right?" she demanded. The question was not a question. It was an accusation, an indictment of his very existence in her perfect world. Her friends fell silent, watching, waiting for their queen's next move. Haley's lips twisted into a sneer. "Go clean something," she commanded, waving a dismissive hand toward the service entrance. "You're not part of the picture." The words hung in the air, brutal and absolute. Then came the laughter. It started as a nervous titter from one of the bridesmaids. Then it spread, growing in confidence as the other guests took their cue from the bride. It was the laughter of insiders, of people who understood the unspoken rules of a hierarchy they sat comfortably atop. They laughed at the waiter, the help, the man who had dared to momentarily disrupt their perfect evening. They laughed because it was easier than confronting the cruelty they had just witnessed. Across the small circle, the groom, Ethan Monroe, froze. The color drained from his face. His eyes, wide with a sudden, sickening panic, darted from Haley's smug expression to the calm, impassive face of the man she had just humiliated. In that moment, the room seemed to shrink, the air growing thin and heavy. The soft music of the string quartet faded into a dull roar in his ears. He saw not a waiter, but a ghost from a life he had tried to leave behind. He saw his brother. Marcus did not flinch. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He simply held Haley's cold gaze for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable in the depths of his dark eyes. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was not a nod of submission, but of acknowledgement. He had seen her, he had heard her, and he would remember. While her arrogance was a loud, garish display, his calm was a deep, unsettling silence. He turned without a word and walked away, his back straight, his steps measured. The camera of the mind stayed tight on his eyes, which held a universe of controlled hurt. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A plan was taking shape. The first move in the game had been made, not by him, but by her. And she had no idea of the checkmate that was to come. Ethan's forced laugh was a brittle, jarring sound in the sudden quiet that followed Marcus's departure. It was a desperate attempt to patch the hole that had just been torn in the fabric of the evening. "Haley, darling," he began, his voice strained. "It was just an accident." He tried to wrap an arm around her, to steer her away from the scene she had created. But she shrugged him off, still basking in the glow of her perceived victory. The guests, eager to move past the uncomfortable moment, took their cue from him. They chuckled, raised their glasses, and pretended nothing of consequence had happened. The murmur of conversation swelled once more, burying the ugliness under layers of polite chatter. But the damage was done. A crack had appeared in the foundation of their perfect world. Haley, oblivious to the storm raging inside her fiancé, turned to her bridesmaids. She whispered, her voice dripping with condescension. "You just have to be firm with the help. If you give them an inch, they take a mile." Her friends nodded in sycophantic agreement, their eyes flicking toward the service door through which Marcus had disappeared. They saw a clumsy waiter being put in his place. They had no inkling they were witnessing a queen signing her own abdication. From across the room, another pair of eyes had watched the entire exchange with a growing sense of disbelief and disgust. Sophie, a young woman working alongside Marcus on the catering team, stood partially hidden behind a marble column. She was a college student working this job to pay for her tuition, and she had seen her fair share of entitled clients. But this was different. It wasn't just rudeness. It was a deep, casual cruelty, a complete disregard for another person's humanity. She saw Haley's sneer, heard the dismissive command, and felt a knot of anger tighten in her stomach. She had worked with Marcus on a few events before. He was quiet, professional, and unfailingly kind. He treated every member of the staff, from the head chef to the dishwashers, with the same level of quiet respect. He never complained, never gossiped, and always did more than his share of the work. Sophie had always sensed there was more to him than met the eye. There was a stillness about him, a self-possessed dignity that seemed out of place in the frantic, often demeaning world of event catering. His calm in the face of Haley's insult wasn't weakness. She knew that instinctively. It was restraint. It was the quiet confidence of a man who knew his own worth, regardless of the uniform he was wearing. Ethan, meanwhile, was falling apart behind a carefully maintained smile. He excused himself from Haley's circle, mumbling something about needing to speak to the band leader. He walked to the bar, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. He needed to clear his head to stop the roaring in his ears. Seeing Marcus here like this was a shock that had sent a jolt through his entire being. He had known his brother owned the estate. Marcus had told him as much in a brief, stilted phone call a month ago. It was a peace offering, a way of being present at his wedding without truly being there. Ethan had accepted, relieved to avoid a direct confrontation, a reopening of old wounds in front of Haley and her powerful family. He had never imagined Marcus would be here in person, let alone dressed as a member of the staff. He raised his glass to the room, his eyes finding Haley's across the sea of smiling faces. "To new beginnings," he projected, his voice louder than necessary. The guests cheered, raising their own glasses in a chorus of oblivious celebration. They toasted a future that for Ethan now felt like a lie. His smile was a mask, and behind it his mind was racing. He was caught between two worlds, the glittering hollow world of the Monroes and the world of his past, a world that included the brother he had abandoned. His eyes glistened, not with joy, but with a profound, gut-wrenching guilt. He was toasting new beginnings while standing on a foundation of old betrayals. The emotional powder keg was set, ticking silently beneath the crisp white tablecloths, waiting for the spark that would ignite it all. And as he took a long, desperate drink of champagne, he had a sinking feeling that the spark had just been struck. The polished opulence of the Magnolia Grove estate was a world away from the cracked pavement and cramped two-bedroom house where Marcus and Ethan Hall had grown up. The story of their estrangement was a quiet tragedy, a tale of two brothers set on divergent paths by the insidious pressures of class and ambition. 10 years ago, they had stood at a crossroads, not a literal one, but a metaphorical fork in the road of their lives. Marcus, the elder by 5 years, was the steady one, the protector, the pragmatist. Ethan was the dreamer, charming and ambitious, with a desperate hunger to escape the shadow of their humble origins. The breaking point had come in the form of a woman, Ethan's first serious fiancée, a daughter of one of Charleston's established families. It was not Haley, but a precursor, a trial run for the kind of life Ethan craved. He had brought her home to meet his brother, his heart full of a nervous hope that she would see past the worn furniture and the simple neighborhood. Marcus had been welcoming, shaking her father's hand firmly, offering them a drink. But the father, A man whose posture radiated a lifetime of unearned superiority had looked around the small living room with a barely concealed sneer. He had surveyed Marcus, a young man working 2 jobs to put himself through night school, and delivered the verdict that would shatter their family. "Ethan has potential," the man had said, his voice smooth and condescending, not even bothering to look Marcus in the eye. "But there is no place for your kind at our table." The words were a slap in the face, a casual dismissal of everything Marcus was and everything they had come from. But the true betrayal came not from the stranger, but from his own brother. Ethan had stood there silent. He had not defended Marcus. He had not challenged the insult. He had simply looked down at his shoes, his face flushed with shame, and a desperate, pathetic desire to be accepted by these people. In his silence, Marcus heard a choice being made. Ethan was choosing a future, and that future did not include him. That night, after the guests had left, the brothers had the quietest, most devastating fight of their lives. There was no shouting, just the heavy weight of unspoken accusations. "You let him talk to me like that, in our own home," Marcus had said, his voice low and wounded. "He's right, isn't he?" Ethan had shot back, his own pain twisting into anger. "Look around, Marcus. Is this what you want forever? I want more." "There's nothing wrong with this," Marcus replied, his gaze sweeping over the home their mother had kept with pride. "The only thing wrong here is a man who is ashamed of where he comes from." Marcus walked away that night, not just from the argument, but from the life that had become a cage for his brother's ambition. He left Charleston, moved to a city where no one knew his name, and poured all of his quiet, relentless determination into building something of his own. He started a small tech logistics company from a garage, fueled by coffee and an unyielding belief in his own abilities. He named it Hall Dynamics, a quiet tribute to the family name his brother had been so eager to shed. He worked while others slept. He strategized while others partied. He built his empire brick by digital brick, quietly, methodically, and without fanfare. Within a decade, the small startup had grown into a billion-dollar global logistics firm, a silent giant with interests in technology, real estate, and shipping. Marcus Hall became a name that opened doors in the highest echelons of business, yet his face remained largely unknown. He valued privacy over fame, results over recognition. When he learned through a stray news clipping that Ethan was engaged again, this time to Haley Monroe, the heiress to a powerful local family, a familiar ache settled in his chest. He saw that his brother was still chasing the same dream, still trying to buy his way into a world that had once rejected them. Curiosity, and perhaps a faint lingering hope, gnawed at him. Had his brother changed? Had a decade of living his dream taught him anything about integrity, about loyalty? So he devised a plan. He had recently acquired the Magnolia Grove estate through one of his holding companies. It was just another asset on a long list, but now it had a purpose. He arranged for Ethan's wedding to be booked there, a quiet, anonymous gift. Then he made a decision that was both strategic and deeply personal. He would attend the rehearsal dinner, but not as a guest. He would come as a waiter. He would put on a uniform and become invisible. He wanted to see with his own eyes the man his brother had become. He wanted to see the woman Ethan was marrying, to understand the world that had finally accepted him. He needed to know if anything had truly changed, or if Ethan was simply living in a prettier version of the same house, still ashamed of the man in the other room. Haley's cruel words had given him his answer. Nothing had changed at all. Back in the glittering present, Sophie couldn't shake the image of Haley's smug face from her mind. It wasn't just the insult. It was the casual, unthinking cruelty behind it, the assumption that a person in a uniform was not a person at all, but a function. She watched Ethan's forced toast, saw the deep, unspoken guilt in his eyes, and knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that this was more than just a bridezilla moment. There was a story here, a secret drama playing out behind the scenes of this picture-perfect party. Her shift was technically over, but she felt a strange pull, a sense of responsibility to not let the moment pass undocumented. She saw Marcus walking toward the service hallway, his shoulders straight, his pace steady. On impulse, she decided to follow him. She found him in the stark, fluorescent-lit corridor that connected the grand ballroom to the bustling kitchen. He was standing by a stainless steel counter, pouring himself a glass of water, his back to the door. For a moment, he seemed to let the mask of professional calm slip. He closed his eyes, and a deep, weary sigh escaped him. It was the sound of a man carrying a weight far heavier than a catering tray. "Excuse me," Sophie said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and his expression was instantly composed again, but she had seen that flicker of vulnerability. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about what happened out there. That was awful. No one deserves to be spoken to like that." Marcus looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time that evening. He saw the genuine empathy in her young face, the quiet indignation on his behalf. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "Thank you, Sophie," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone that was surprisingly resonant. "But there's no need to apologize for what others choose to reveal about themselves." The word struck Sophie with unexpected force. He wasn't just brushing off an insult. He was offering a profound piece of wisdom. In that moment, she realized her initial instinct had been correct. This was no ordinary man. There was a power in his stillness, a depth in his calm that was more commanding than all the loud, boastful displays of wealth in the ballroom next door. His poise wasn't just good training, it was character. He possessed a quiet respect that came from within, something that could not be bought or taught. An idea, bold and slightly reckless, formed in her mind. This wasn't about gossip or revenge. It was about justice. It was about making sure that Haley's casual cruelty didn't just disappear into the air, forgotten by morning. People like her, Sophie thought, moved through the world, leaving a wake of small wounds, never facing any consequences because their victims were deemed powerless. She felt a deep, abiding need to create a record, a small piece of evidence that this had happened. Making an excuse about needing to check the schedule, she slipped back toward the ballroom. She positioned herself near the group where Haley was now laughing and retelling the story of the champagne spill, embellishing it to make herself sound even more powerful and in control. "I simply put him in his place," she was saying, to the appreciative giggles of her friends. Sophie discreetly pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she hit the record button. She filmed for less than a minute, capturing Haley's mocking laughter and a snippet of her bragging. The quality was poor, the sound muffled by the party's noise. But it was enough. It was proof. She didn't know what she would do with it, or if she would do anything at all. But as she saved the short clip, she felt a sense of rightness. It was a weapon held in reserve, not for an attack, but for a defense of the dignity that Haley had so carelessly tried to trample. She had become an unwitting archivist of the truth, capturing the moment just before the scales of justice began to tip. Inside the ballroom, fueled by champagne and the adoration of her guests, Haley Monroe's arrogance began to metastasize. The incident with the waiter, far from being a moment of shame, had become a source of pride, a story she recounted with increasing dramatic flair. With each retelling, her voice grew louder, her gestures more theatrical. She felt powerful, untouchable, the queen of her gilded kingdom. She was the center of the universe, and every person in it was either an admirer or an obstacle. Her mother, Victoria Monroe, a woman sculpted from the same marble of entitlement, listened with a proud smile. Victoria saw her daughter's cruelty not as a character flaw, but as a sign of strength, a necessary tool for navigating a world she believed was theirs for the taking. When Haley finished her story with a triumphant flourish, Victoria chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "That's my girl," she said, squeezing Haley's arm. "You have to keep the help in their place. It's for their own good. It teaches them discipline. This was the Monroe philosophy, a doctrine of inherited superiority passed down from one generation to the next. Their conversation soon turned to the wedding itself, which they envisioned as the social event of the season. They weren't just planning a marriage, they were staging a production. "We'll have the local news channels cover the arrival," Victoria said, her eyes gleaming with ambition. "And the live stream needs to be flawless. We'll have drone shots of the estate, close-ups of the dress. Everyone who is anyone will be watching." Haley nodded enthusiastically, her mind already filled with visions of headlines and fawning social media posts. The wedding was not about love or commitment. It was about solidifying their status, about broadcasting their power to the world. All the while, Ethan stood on the periphery of their conversation, a silent, increasingly uneasy ghost at his own celebration. He nursed a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid doing little to calm the frantic churning in his gut. Each boastful word from Haley, each approving nod from Victoria, felt like a stone being added to the crushing weight on his chest. He heard them talking about the help, and all he could see was his brother's calm, wounded face. He saw the years of distance between them, the chasm created by his own weakness, and he felt a profound sense of shame. He had to say something. He had to try, at least, to stop this train before it careened off the cliff he could see so clearly up ahead. He waited for a lull in their planning, then cleared his throat. "Haley," he started, his voice a little thick from the alcohol. "About the venue. About the owner." Haley waved a dismissive hand, her attention already drifting to a guest across the room. "Oh, Ethan, don't worry about that. I'm sure Daddy's check cleared." "No, that's not it," he persisted, a desperate edge to his tone. "The man who owns this place, his name is Marcus Hall." He said the name, hoping it would trigger some flicker of recognition, some connection in her self-absorbed mind. But she just stared at him blankly. A mocking smile played on her lips. "Marcus Hall? Never heard of him." She looked around the magnificent ballroom, a gesture of grand appraisal. "Well, whoever he is, he runs a fine staff. Most of them, anyway." She winked, a sly, cruel reference to the man she had just humiliated. Victoria laughed again, and the moment was lost. Ethan's attempt to confess, to warn her, had been swatted away like an annoying fly. He fell silent, retreating back into his glass of whiskey. The air in the room, once filled with celebration, now felt tense and suffocating to him. Haley's casual, unknowing words hung there, suspended like a curse waiting to be answered. She was mocking the very man whose roof she stood under, insulting the ghost who held the deed to her fairy tale castle. Ethan took another long drink, the whiskey burning a path down his throat. He felt a chilling premonition, a sense of impending doom that was as real and as solid as the crystal glass in his hand. He was a passenger on a sinking ship, and the captain was celebrating how beautifully the water glittered as it poured over the deck. Long after the last guest had departed, after the laughter had faded and the string quartet had packed their instruments, a profound silence settled over the Magnolia Grove estate. The grand ballroom, now empty, was a ghost of its former self. Tables stood bare, littered with crumpled napkins and abandoned glasses. The golden light from the chandeliers seemed softer now, more melancholic, illuminating a scene of quiet aftermath. It was in this vast, empty space that Marcus Hall stood, no longer a waiter, but the master of the house, surveying his domain. He walked slowly across the marble floor, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He stopped at the very spot where Haley had humiliated him, where the few drops of champagne had started a chain reaction that could no longer be stopped. He felt a deep, weary sadness, not for himself, but for his brother. He had come here seeking a sign of change, a glimmer of hope that Ethan had found his own strength, his own moral compass. Instead, he had found his brother trapped in the same gilded cage, smiling blankly while his fiancée revealed the casual cruelty of her soul. He had made his decision. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for action had come. He pulled his phone from his pocket. the sleek black device a stark contrast to the old-world opulence surrounding him. He dialed a single number, one he knew by heart. It rang twice before a calm, composed female voice answered. "Good evening, Mr. Hall." It was Alani, his chief of staff, a woman whose efficiency was matched only by her loyalty. Marcus put the phone on speaker, his voice resonating in the empty hall. "Alani, it's time." "Understood," she replied, her tone all business. There was no need for lengthy explanations. She had been briefed on the situation, on the contingency plans he had put in place. "Do you want me to proceed with the full protocol?" "Yes," Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm, imbued with an absolute authority. "I want you to proceed. Effective immediately. Transfer the full ownership of the Magnolia Grove estate from the holding company directly into my name. I want it done tonight. I want the public records updated by morning. Make sure the local press gets an anonymous tip about the transfer before the sun comes up." "It will be done, sir," Alani confirmed. "And the second part of the protocol?" "That too," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the empty room, imagining it filled with the people who would soon have their world turned upside down. "Draft a formal invitation. Send it to Victoria Monroe, Haley Monroe, and my brother Ethan. Invite them to a priority board breakfast tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp, in the main conference room at headquarters." "What should I list as the purpose of the meeting?" Alani asked. Marcus allowed himself a small, mirthless smile. "Let's call it a pre-wedding press briefing and partnership review. They'll be expecting cameras and reporters. They won't be expecting me." "Consider it handled, Mr. Hall," Alani said. "The invitations will be in their inboxes within the hour." "Thank you, Alani," Marcus said, and ended the call. He stood in the silence for another long moment, the weight of his decision settling upon him. This wasn't about revenge, not in the petty way Haley would understand it. This was about consequences. It was about holding a mirror up to the Monroes, to his brother, to the world they inhabited, and forcing them to see the ugly truth of their own reflections. The next morning, as the sun cast its first gentle rays over Charleston, the wheels of justice were already turning. A short, intriguing article appeared on the website of the city's leading newspaper, announcing the surprise overnight acquisition of the historic Magnolia Grove estate by the reclusive billionaire founder of Hall Dynamics, Marcus D. Hall. In the inboxes of the Monroe family, a crisp, formal email sat waiting, summoning them to a meeting they believed was the first step in their week of triumph. They had no idea they were walking into a boardroom that would soon become their personal courtroom, with a judge they had already sentenced in their own minds. The main conference room at Hall Dynamics was a world of cool, understated power. Located on the top floor of a sleek glass and steel tower that overlooked the Charleston harbor, it was the antithesis of the old-world opulence of the Monroe estate. The room was minimalist and modern, dominated by a long, polished obsidian table. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a view that spoke of ownership and command. There were no chandeliers, no gilded frames, just the quiet hum of a global empire at work. Haley and Victoria Monroe arrived precisely at 9 a.m., their faces beaming with anticipation. They were dressed in expensive power suits, ready for what they believed would be a fawning press conference to kick off the wedding festivities. They saw the meeting as a tribute to their own importance. Haley was practically vibrating with excitement, imagining the flash of camera bulbs and the softball questions from eager reporters. Victoria wore an expression of serene satisfaction, the look of a matriarch surveying a kingdom that was rightfully hers. Ethan followed a few steps behind them, his face pale and drawn. He hadn't slept. The crisp invitation in his inbox had felt less like a request and more like a summons. He knew, with a sick certainty, that this was not a press conference. He knew who Marcus Hall was. The name on the invitation had confirmed his worst fears. He had tried to warn Haley again that morning, but she had brushed him off with an irritated sigh, telling him not to be so nervous. He felt like a man being led to his own execution. An assistant with a polite, unreadable smile led them into the conference room. And then they saw him. The room was empty except for one man sitting at the head of the long, dark table. He was not in a waiter's uniform. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple, elegant tie. He exuded an aura of such quiet, concentrated power that it seemed to suck the very air out of the room. His hands were folded calmly on the table in front of him, and next to them, a small, gleaming silver plate was engraved with his name, Marcus D. Hall, founder and CEO, Hall Dynamics. The room fell into a sudden, crushing silence. The cheerful chatter from Haley and Victoria died in their throats. Haley's confident smile faltered, then collapsed entirely. A wave of confusion, then dawning horror washed over her face. She looked from the man in the suit to the nameplate, then back to the man. Her mind struggled to connect the two images, the powerful CEO at the head of the table and the humble waiter she had sneered at just hours before. They were the same person. It was impossible, and yet it was undeniably true. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty, sickly white. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The expensive leather portfolio she was carrying slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the plush carpet with a soft, muffled thud. Victoria Monroe froze beside her, her own mask of regal composure cracking under the strain of the revelation. Her eyes darted from Marcus to Ethan, a silent, frantic question in her gaze. But Ethan wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his brother, his face a mixture of fear, shame, and a strange, long-buried sense of awe. He had known his brother was successful, but he had never truly understood the scale of it. He had never seen Marcus in his own element, in the seat of his own power. And it was terrifying. The game was over. The truth was here, sitting at the head of the table, waiting patiently for them to acknowledge it. The silence in the boardroom stretched, becoming heavier and more unbearable with each passing second. It was a silence filled with the deafening sound of a world turning upside down. Haley's mind was a whirlwind of denial and panic, desperately trying to find an explanation, a mistake, a reason why the man she had dismissed as the help was now sitting in a position of absolute power over her. Victoria stood rigid, her face a mask of disbelief, the gears of her calculating mind grinding to a halt. It was Ethan who finally broke the spell. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his movements stiff, as if wading through thick water. He did not look at Haley or her mother. His eyes were fixed on the calm, imposing figure at the head of the table. He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the dead quiet of the room. "Haley," he said, his voice raspy, barely a whisper. "Mother." He paused, gathering every last shred of his courage. "This is my brother." The words, simple and direct, landed with the force of a physical blow. Haley let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Victoria's face, which had been pale with shock, now flushed with a dark, rising anger. "Your brother?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "What is the meaning of this, Ethan?" But Ethan ignored her. He was speaking to his past, to his future, to the man he had wronged. The full weight of the realization finally crashed down upon them. It wasn't just that the waiter was a millionaire, it was that the waiter was Ethan's brother. The man they had mocked, the man Victoria had smugly advised Haley to keep in his place, owned not only the venue for their wedding, but as they were about to discover, he held a significant controlling interest in several of the companies the Monroe family depended on for their wealth. Through a complex network of holding firms and subsidiary corporations, Marcus Hall had, over the years, become their silent, invisible landlord and business partner. Marcus had not moved. He had not spoken. He had simply watched them, his expression unreadable, letting the truth do its work. Now he finally broke his silence. His voice was not loud, it was not angry, it was quiet, measured, and carried the weight of a final judgment. "It's easy to see a person's true soul," he said, his gaze settling on Haley, pinning her in place. "When they believe no one of consequence is watching." Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing her pride, her arrogance, her entire sense of self. The reality of her situation came into sharp focus. This wasn't just a social embarrassment. This was a catastrophe. Her entire future, the merger of her family's social standing with Ethan's perceived potential, was built on a foundation of lies and omissions. Trembling, she found her voice. I am so sorry," she stammered, the words sounding hollow and pathetic even to her own ears. "I didn't know. I had no idea who you were." She started to cry, her carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. Marcus looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of something cold and hard entered his eyes. "That," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "is precisely the problem. You didn't know. And you never cared to know." He reached for a slim file folder that lay on the table in front of him. He opened it and slid a stack of documents across the polished obsidian surface. The papers glided silently, coming to a stop directly in front of Victoria. They were contracts, partnership agreements, lease renewals, all bearing the signatures of Monroe family executives, alongside the letterhead of various companies they now knew were controlled by Hall Dynamics. On top of each document, in bold red ink, was a single word: terminated. The sight of the red ink, stark against the white paper, finally broke Haley. A raw, guttural sob escaped her lips. Her knees gave way and she sagged against the table for support. The carefully applied mascara she had chosen for her press debut began to streak down her pale cheeks, leaving black trails of ruin in its wake. "Please," she pleaded, her voice choked and desperate. "Don't do this. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I didn't know." Her apology was a frantic, panicked attempt to undo the damage, but it was driven by fear, not remorse. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry she had been caught. Marcus's reply was swift and cutting, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You didn't know he was my brother. You didn't know he was wealthy, but you knew he was a human being. You knew he was a man doing a job, and you decided he was worth less than the dirt on your shoes because he was serving you a drink. That is what you need to be sorry for, but you're not." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suffocating silence. "This isn't a punishment for your rudeness to me. This is a consequence for your character." The silence that followed was crushing. It was the silence of a world ending. The staff who had been standing by discreetly in the hallway, the same people who served the Monroes coffee and took their coats, now stood perfectly, still their faces impassive, but their eyes missing nothing. They had all heard stories of Haley's temper, of Victoria's condescension. Today they were silent witnesses to their downfall. Among them, standing near the back, was Sophie. She had been called in to assist with the press briefing, and her heart had pounded in her chest when she saw Marcus at the head of the table. She watched the scene unfold, not with satisfaction or glee, but with a profound sense of gravity. This was justice, swift and absolute. She saw Haley's breakdown, the mascara-stained tears of a queen who had lost her kingdom, and she felt a flicker of pity. But it was quickly extinguished by the memory of the cruel, mocking laughter from the night before. This moment of truth was not for public consumption, not for a viral video. It was a lesson, hard and painful, delivered in the quiet, sterile atmosphere of a corporate boardroom. It was a stark and unforgettable reminder that dignity could not be bought, and that belittling others was a debt that would sooner or later be collected. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By noon, the story had broken, and it spread through Charleston's elite circles and then onto the internet like a wildfire. The narrative was too perfect, too potent to be contained. The bride who mocked a black waiter, who secretly owned her wedding venue and was her fiancé's billionaire brother. The headlines wrote themselves. Sophie's short, muffled video clip, anonymously leaked to a local blogger, added a layer of undeniable proof. Haley's mocking voice and the sound of her friends' laughter became the soundtrack to her public humiliation. Corporate sponsors who had lined up to attach their brands to the wedding of the year pulled out in a panic, issuing press releases about their commitment to respect and inclusivity. The local news channels that had been scheduled to broadcast the bride's arrival now ran segments detailing the Monroe family's sudden, spectacular fall from grace. The high-profile wedding, the ultimate symbol of their social dominance, was officially, irrevocably canceled. The carefully constructed world of Haley and Victoria Monroe crumbled into dust in a matter of hours. Victoria, who had once bragged about keeping the help in their place, found her words plastered across news sites and social media, turning her into a pariah. The charitable board she sat on requested her immediate resignation. The country club where she had ruled as a social queen suddenly found her presence unwelcome. She had become toxic, a living embodiment of an arrogance that the world, at least for this moment, had decided it would no longer tolerate. In the midst of the chaos, there were quiet acts of realignment. Marcus, true to his word, valued character above all else. He called Sophie into his office the following day. She arrived, nervous and unsure of what to expect. He didn't mention the video, but he didn't have to. He looked at her with a calm, appraising gaze. "You showed empathy and integrity when it would have been easier to look away," he said simply. "Those are qualities I value in my organization." He offered her a position not as a caterer, but as the new full-time events director for the Magnolia Grove estate, along with a full scholarship to complete her degree. She was stunned into silence, then accepted with tears of gratitude in her eyes. It was a life-changing opportunity, born from a single, simple act of kindness. The most public consequence, however, was the one that played out between the two brothers. A few days after the canceled wedding, photographers captured a quiet, unstaged moment outside the Hall Dynamics building. Ethan, looking tired but somehow lighter, met Marcus on the steps. There were no press agents, no grand announcements. Ethan simply extended his hand. Marcus took it. They shook hands, a firm, lingering grip that spoke of forgiveness, of reunion, of a long and painful chapter finally coming to a close. The photograph of that handshake, of the two estranged brothers finally acknowledging each other, became the defining image of the story. It was a public declaration from Ethan. He was done pretending. He was done being ashamed. He had chosen his brother. He had left Haley and the hollow world she represented behind, and in doing so, had finally begun the long journey back to himself. Weeks melted into a quiet, restorative rhythm. The media storm subsided, leaving behind the wreckage of the Monroe family's reputation and a lingering public conversation about class and respect. One cool autumn afternoon, Marcus drove to a modest, clean-lined apartment building on the quieter side of town. He took the elevator to the third floor and knocked on the door. It was opened by Ethan. He was dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, his face free of the strained anxiety that had been his constant companion for years. He looked, for the first time in a long time, at peace. He led Marcus to a small balcony that overlooked a canopy of trees. There was no lavish decor, no priceless art on the walls, just a few comfortable chairs and a small table. There was no audience, no one to impress. It was just two brothers sharing a pot of coffee as the afternoon sun cast long shadows on the ground below. They sat in a comfortable silence for a while, the silence of two people who no longer needed to fill the space with noise. The wounds between them were old and deep, and they knew healing would take time, but the process had begun. "I sold the ring," Ethan said finally, looking down into his coffee mug. gave the money to a local youth shelter. Seemed like the right thing to do. Marcus nodded slowly. It was. I've been thinking a lot, Ethan continued, his voice quiet and reflective. About that day 10 years ago. About Dad. About everything. He looked up, his eyes meeting his brother's. I was a coward, Marcus. I was so desperate to be someone else. I forgot who I was. I'm sorry. For all of it. It was the apology Marcus had waited a decade to hear. Not the panicked, self-serving apology Haley had offered in the boardroom, but a real one, born of genuine regret and self-awareness. Some lessons, Marcus said, his voice gentle, can only come through pain. For you and for them. He gestured vaguely in the direction of the wealthy part of town where the Monroes lived. You can't build a life on a foundation of shame. Ethan nodded, a sense of release washing over him. For the first time, he wasn't looking at his brother as a reminder of his own failures, but as an anchor. He saw the quiet strength that had allowed Marcus to build an empire, the unshakable integrity that he had mistaken for a lack of ambition. He was finally at peace with the man his brother had become, because he was finally starting to become the man he was supposed to be. The bond, stretched thin and frayed by years of distance and betrayal, was beginning to reforge, stronger and more authentic than it had ever been before. They were no longer two separate people on divergent paths, but brothers, finding their way back to a shared road. In a world obsessed with status, where the value of a person is too often measured by their job title, their bank account, or the brand of their clothes, some forget a fundamental truth. True power is silent, and dignity doesn't wear a name tag. It is not found in a grand title or an expensive suit, but in the quiet courage of one's character. That day at a lavish party meant to celebrate a union of wealth and influence. A single cruel laugh exposed the brittle nature of arrogance. A bride, cloaked in the privilege she believed made her untouchable, revealed the poverty of her own soul. She looked at a man and saw only a uniform, a function, an object to be dismissed. But in that same moment, one man's grace revealed the true nature of character. His calm was not weakness, it was strength. His silence was not submission, it was wisdom. He knew that a person's worth is not determined by the judgment of others, but by their own integrity. In the end, the bride lost her crown, her palace, and the future she had so carefully constructed. Her kingdom, built on a foundation of scorn, collapsed under the weight of a simple, undeniable truth. But the waiter, the man she had tried to make small, never needed a crown in the first place. His wealth was not in his bank account, but in his unwavering sense of self. His kingdom was not a grand estate, but the unshakable foundation of his own dignity. The story fades on Marcus Hall, walking alone through the now empty ballroom of the Magnolia Grove estate. The storm has passed. Sunlight, pure and golden, streams through the tall, arched windows, bathing the room in a peaceful, cleansing light. He stops in the center of the room, not as a waiter, and not as a CEO, but simply as a man at peace with himself, a quiet victor in a battle that was won not with anger, but with grace. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.